What's your slant? A colleague asked me this when I told her I was planning to speak about Israel today. What's your slant? It took me aback. Not because it's an unreasonable question, and of course I knew what she meant. Speaking about Israel is both a must-do this year and also daunting. There is just so much to say. What of any value can I possibly add to the conversation already swirling around us? Also, I find myself without adequate words most of the time. I imagine I'm not alone. The truth is that I have started this sermon more times than I care to admit. Did I need to write a love letter for Israel, replete with stories of resilience and survival, unadulterated, unquestioning support? Did I need to write a sermon speaking up as a Jew for the thousands of Palestinians in Gaza killed in the crossfires of war? Perhaps I should use this time to offer a primer on Zionism and why it matters. Or maybe the answer is all of the above. In any case, here's my slant in two parts. First, Zionism, a love of Israel, the land and the people, has always been a core part of Jewish values, Jewish prayer, Jewish thought, and Jewish hope. In different times and places, the love of and longing for Zion, which it turns out is just a Hebrew word referring to what we now call Israel, has read differently. But as I understand it, long before political Zionism, a 19th century movement to reclaim our ancient homeland as a modern state, Zionism as a value has been a central Jewish tenet. Zionism at its essence supports building and strengthening a Jewish home in the land of Israel that inches ever closer to shalem, to wholeness, that is enveloped in shalom, in peace. And part two, it is this hope-filled Zionism, both the practical and the aspirational, that I insist is necessary for the millions of Jews who live there, for the 1 in 5 non-Jewish Israeli citizens who also call it home, and yes, for the millions of Palestinians in our neighborhood too. Although my understanding of Zionism is in part aspirational, I believe it is essential for us to articulate, even when we don't know how to make it a reality. I am a Zionist, a hope-filled Zionist, tethered to a vision not yet fulfilled. I believe in Israel's right to exist, in the right of Israel to defend herself from enemies, from terror, and from violence. I believe in the early Zionist dream of fostering a living, breathing, national Jewish culture that represents the highest ideals of Jewish peoplehood. My Zionism insists that this Jewish state must be democratic, celebrating the pluralism of Jewish practice and identity. And crucially, my Zionism is not a zero-sum game and must exist alongside Palestinian nationalism and identity. The first person Asher hugged at camp drop-off at the end of June was a counselor, Ben. Ben is 6 foot something tall, an oversized teddy bear, and is a member of the Mishlachat, the beloved Israeli delegation at URJ Crane Lake Camp in the Berkshires. Asher, 9, was returning for his 3rd summer at this place of vibrant Jewish living and kindness and magic. Ben had been Asher's counselor the summer before, and Asher, full speed ahead, ran right into his arms. The best part, Ben had moved up with his campers from last summer, another 7 weeks together. Interacting with Israeli staff is a core part of all of the Reform movement's summer camp experiences. This summer was no exception, but of course the lead up to camp felt different. How would Israelis feel about leaving their homes, leaving their families, and coming to camp in the States? What would they find when they got to West Stockbridge? with all that they had read about the response to the war between Israel and Hamas here and abroad, would they feel welcomed or shunned? It may surprise you to learn that many counselors arrive each summer from something like 18 different countries. Some are not Jewish, and many had spent the year living in places without large, vibrant Jewish communities. How would these 18 to 22-year-olds interact with the Israelis in their bunks and on their teams? Most of their awareness of Israel came from the news and social media. They were familiar with anti-Israel protests and rhetoric, but hadn't, in many cases, yet met any Israelis. During staff week, there was an optional program planned by the directors. Staff were invited, but not required, to come and hear the Israelis' stories from October 7th and the days and months that followed. The Israelis worried. Would the staff show up? And if they did, would they listen with open minds and open hearts? They did come, and it was a transformative night of heartbreaking storytelling, relationship building, and learning. All of these young people have now returned to their communities all over Europe, in Australia, and in New Zealand, to their friends and families and universities, after living with people they would never have known and stories they would never have heard. When I arrived at camp in the middle of July to serve on camp faculty, I learned that we were needed to help plan an early goodbye for Asher's favorite counselor. Ben had been called back for reserve duty in Gaza, just 2 weeks into the full swing of camp. How could we send him off into war in a way that would not frighten our youngest campers? A few days later, 500 of us gathered in the rec hall for Havdalah at the end of Shabbat to say goodbye. Ben was heading back to Israel, to his reserve unit, and then to Gaza. We sang, we cried, we gave thanks, we prayed for his safety, for Israel, for an end to the war. Ben's story is not all that unique for Israelis, but it was a first for most of the camp community. This reminded me that part of what we, largely American Jews, lack is this kind of sticky, personal connection with the reality of Israel, the stuff that can help us move our conversation from accusation to aspiration. People often forget that Israel is a real place, not an idea, neither a paragon of virtue nor a paradigm of evil. You know, real. And for the adults and kids at camp, like Asher, there was real concern for what would happen to real people, counselors whom we all love. Each time I see Ben post on Instagram, I think of Rabbi Chana Yerushalmi's poem called In His Pocket, which she wrote this summer after a hostage was released from Gaza, a Bedouin father of 11. Her poem reflects the real Israel as seen through the eyes of a child. She writes, "The rabbis advised, keep 2 truths in your pocket. One should read, 'I am but dust and ashes,' and the other should read, 'The entire world was created for me.' An 8-year-old has something else in his pocket. Confetti. Why? It's his emergency confetti, he says. During these raw days, he carries it with him everywhere, just in case there is good news." There is so much to feel right now. My heart continues to break over October 7th for the more than 1,200 lives snuffed out, the soldiers killed, the torment inflicted on the living, the hostages and their families trapped in a living nightmare. My heart breaks for the displaced Israelis who still have not returned home. And yes, my heart breaks for the Gazans caught in this tragedy as well. I can't hug my children tightly enough. And I can't let go of my commitment to ensure that my Zionism, that our Zionism, helps us stay strong and survive. In the days following October 7th, almost immediately after we learned of the horror of that day, we also began to hear what we needed to remember, the context, as if Israel had somehow brought this on herself. One thread that particularly grabbed me was posted by JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, which opposes Zionism in the name of Judaism, and which seized upon the crisis over the past year to assert that Zionism is not an inherent part of Judaism, that we can and should be Jewish without the state of Israel. When I began to think about what to write for these holy days, I kept coming back to the question their assertion begs. Is Zionism an essential, inherent part of Judaism? Does the state of Israel fundamentally have a right to exist? Do the Jews really need this state? I've already told you where I land. Yes, yes, and yes. Torah tells us that Avram and Sarai, founders of our faith and parents of our people, who would come to be known as Abraham and Sarah, heard and heeded God's call of Lech Lecha, go forth, and began a journey El Haaretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you, as God directed. And while this is not the beginning of 19th century political Zionism, it is the beginning of our story as a people, and the story of our people's connection to a land. This connection persists all the way through the Torah, through centuries of slavery in Egypt and 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, until we stand at the edge of the Jordan River and prepare to reunite with our land. Expulsion and return are the dominant themes that seesaw back and forth throughout Jewish history, but our connection to the land of Israel and the people of Israel holds fast. It binds us and it propels us forward. What we call Zionism today emerged in the mid-1800s, and it is surprisingly diverse. We should really call it Zionisms, because the longing to return home signifies many different things, from achieving internationally recognized statehood to maintaining a religious connection to the land, to building an apparatus for self-defense, to the flourishing of our unique language and culture, arts and letters. The Zionism of today is informed by all of these. So when people get confused about what Zionism means, it's for good reason. To some extent, it depends on who is speaking. For me, Zionism will always be informed by our ancestral connection and how we root our identity in the Israel of antiquity, as well as our aspirational collaboration, how we use our Judaism to create a state that exemplifies the most noble of Jewish values. But as is typical of all things Jewish, there will be different ways each of us understands Zionism, and we may not always agree. Just because I believe that Zionism cannot be divorced from Judaism, must every single Jew be a Zionist? While I wish everyone would share my passion for and commitment to Zionism, I recognize and respect that well-meaning, thoughtful people I care about, might feel differently, and I would not excommunicate them from the Jewish people or alienate them from Jewish tradition. It is possible to embrace our anti-Zionists as fellow Jews while taking pains not to mainstream their anti-Zionist ideology. Think for a moment about the way we embrace Jews with differing beliefs about God, or no belief at all. I believe in God, full stop. And before October 7th, I had hoped to be giving a sermon about God today, maybe next year. But I know that sitting here in this room, we have agnostics and atheists and lots of people with excellent questions sitting alongside others with deeply held, deeply varied beliefs in God. Even though Adonai Echad, our one God, is a central premise of Judaism, and we formally affirm this position every time we gather in prayer, we are okay with a kaleidoscope of statements about this one God. Similarly, I would like to believe that our communities and our hearts can be wide enough to include those who do not embrace every precept of Jewish life. When our children or relatives or friends or neighbors come to us with statements that rock our core beliefs, we have options. We can listen, We can engage in conversation. We can agree to disagree. We can even say, you know what, I can't talk to you about this. But let's not slam doors in their faces. Let's not hurl abuse at them or tell them that they have no place among our people. This is not how Judaism flourishes, and this is not how we model what we hope to create. So where do I find hope? Hope is hard, especially when we have lived this year of brutal, violent, deeply personal war, an anti-Semitism of a kind and degree unseen in our time. And I'll return to this on Yom Kippur. It's been a year of heartbreak, anger, fear, and hope is hard to find. So what gives you hope? Israel's national anthem insists that hope is not an optional ingredient. Od lo avda tikvatenu. We have never lost our hope. Hatikva bat shnot alpayim, the hope of 2,000 years. Lihiyot am chofshi be'artzenu, to be a free people in our land. In Judaism, hope is not a feeling. It's an imperative. Ben, camp counselor, friend, protector, warrior, Ben gives me hope. The resilient people of Israel give me hope. My friends and family in Israel and here at home give me hope. You give me hope. Michael Koppolo, Israel Policy Forum's chief policy officer, he said that we give him hope. He observed that after October 7th, as the war expanded, the Jewish people did not say, ugh, this is just too hard to be Jewish and connect with Israel. No. Collectively, we have leaned in and we have felt our Jewish identities deepen. The only Reform rabbi ever elected to the Knesset, Gilad Kariv, warns that this moment is not a 1973 moment, a reflection just of massive failure of government and intelligence, which then resulted in the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War. Soberingly, Rabbi Kariv says, this is a 1948 moment. The existence of the state of Israel is being challenged. So we do need to stand up for the half of the world's Jewish population who live in Israel, for the vision of tikva not yet realized, but certainly never lost. It's not just because we need a safe place, and we do. In the words of the late lauded Israeli writer Abi Yehoshua, a Zionist is a person who accepts the principle that the state of Israel does not belong solely to its citizens, but to the entire Jewish people. One way that we can be actively involved in shaping the Israel of our Zionism is to participate in the World Zionist Congress this spring, a crucial effort that begins right now. The World Zionist Congress, sometimes called the Parliament of the Jewish people, is the elected legislative body that serves as the one platform for diaspora Jews, that's us, to have a vote in the policy and the budget of Israel. Predating the state of Israel, the World Zionist Congress endures because the founders recognized that Israel is a project of the entire Jewish people, and that world Jewry is inextricably linked to the people and to the state of Israel. Today, the Congress meets every 5 years to enact policies and make decisions that impact billions in spending. What does that look like? 2 examples among many, one geopolitical and one about civil rights. First, the Reform movement has long stood against the continued expansion of settlements in the West Bank, recognizing their harm to the peace process and Israel's security. In the last WZC election, Reform movement votes proved crucial in squashing a major land grab for settlements in some of the most hotly contested areas of the West Bank, like Hebron and Jericho. And another example, among the many massacred on October 7th was the entire Capshooter family, a family of 4. Because the father in this family was not born to a Jewish mother, the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical state monopoly denied his burial in his hometown cemetery. His parents' trauma, having to bury their child, his wife, and their grandchildren, was compounded by having to make the difficult decision to bury the whole family outside of the cemetery border. At a time when these families should have been held closest by the Jewish people, they suffered indignity at the hands of the Orthodox rabbinate, which controls all decisions about life cycles and legally recognized Jewish observance. Your vote in the WZC will allocate funds to the Israel Religious Action Center, the Israeli Reform Movement's lobbying arm, which works to actualize a pluralistic and inclusive Israel that grants dignity to all people. It's no surprise that there is already a great deal of mobilization against these, our Reformed Jewish values. Particularly on the extreme right, robust organizing is already taking place, attempting to create an Israel without democracy, without inclusion, without religious pluralism, without sustainable safety for all Israelis, to say nothing of the Palestinians who will be further disenfranchised if the ultra-Orthodox prevail. The good news, and I really mean this, is that every self-identified 18 or older Jewish adult in North America can vote in this election. And these votes really matter, just like the ones in our national election next month, in shaping the future of Israel. The vote will take place between March and May of 2025. If you'd like to help and become a captain for our Barnert community and beyond to ensure that all eligible people cast their votes, please let me know. As we have already said, after October 7th, we stopped our regular Erev Shabbat singing of Mi Chamocha, our ancient word celebrating freedom, and instead we have offered this blessing: Baruch atah Adonai, asher asanu asirei tikva. Blessed are you, God, who makes us captives of hope. These words have held us during this last year. They have reminded us that we cannot lose tikvatenu, our hope, not for our hostages, not for Israel, not for what we have yet to create be'artzenu, in our land. Zionism is a belief in a land of hope, and we here remain captives of that hope. I pray that we will continue to be proud, hopeful Zionists who are connected in our own ways, just as Zionists have always been, with Eretz Yisrael, with the state of Israel, and with Am Yisrael, with the people of Israel. May the hostages come home. May this war end. May there finally be a time to mourn. May our mourning turn in time into dancing. May this new year bring safety and peace. Let's keep our emergency confetti ready for when there is good news. May it come soon.